Has anyone ever told you how much they hate your movie? Or is the fear of whatever you make being rejected by people something that's actually stopping you from making a film in the first place? If so, then you might find this story particularly helpful, because it's about a filmmaker who went from absolutely nothing to making something to being told it was terrible, but then using that feedback to actually shape his career and define himself as one of the most unique and interesting filmmakers of the 21st century. Oh, and by the way, I'm not actually going to tell you who this filmmaker is until the end of the story, but if you have an idea of who it is and you want to write down the time code in the comments below, I'll get to see just how much of a know-it-all you actually are. Okay, let's begin. So the story starts with our filmmaker leaving film school and having this dream, like most film school students, of making their first feature movie. And it's important to point out that this particular filmmaker wasn't alone in his journey. He was joined by another fellow film school graduate, a friend of his, who also wanted to make a feature. And between them, they decided that what they wanted to make was a gangster movie. And not just any gangster movie. They wanted to make a classic. They wanted to make something that could sit up on a shelf next to The Godfather and Goodfellas and give them serious credentials as new filmmakers in the industry. This led to their first set of problems, and it's kind of the set of problems that all first-time filmmakers have. 1, they had no money. 2, they had no actors or crew they could use. And 3, they had no proof of their skills and therefore no way to persuade anyone to back them. And that's a kind of hard place to make The Godfather or Goodfellas from. So they reframed the question. What is it they actually had that they could use to make their first feature? Well, first of all, they had themselves. And with that in mind, our filmmaker decided he was going to direct and that his fellow filmmaker would take the lead role. Not only this, but our new lead actor also had an acting brother who he roped in to star in this project. But this presented our filmmaker with his next problem. Although his actors were keen and ready to do the project, neither of them really looked like the gangster type. They were awkward, funny looking. So with credibility being a problem, it was time to rejig the idea they had in mind for a story. Because whilst they couldn't pull off chiseled, grisly gangster types, they certainly could pull off awkward, inexperienced, wannabe gangster types. This sounded like an idea for an interesting movie that no one had seen before. So with this settled and a script written, our filmmaker shot a 13-minute black and white short. That's all their budget was stretched to. However, this short was good. So good, in fact, that it got accepted for the Sundance Film Festival. Now things are looking pretty rosy for our filmmaker. He's taken all the things he had and has made a short movie that has got him into one of the most prestigious independent film festivals going. To his mind, all he has to do is show up now and Hollywood filmmaking stardom awaits. I mean, that's exactly what happened to Steven Soderbergh, Quentin Tarantino and Kevin Smith, so it's very obvious that that's exactly what's going to happen here, right? Wrong. Our filmmaker and his filmmaking buddies arrive in Sundance. Their movie is shown and absolutely nothing happens. There's no fanfare. The Hollywood cavalry don't arrive. No one shows particular interest in their short film. Except, that is, for one producer. One producer sees their movie and realises that there's potential. So much, in fact, that upon calling her studio, she's able to get these guys the budget to turn this short into a feature film. Not only this, but her studio manages to persuade Godfather acting legend James Caan to take a role in the feature. So our filmmaker heads back home with his buddies, and in their hometown they shoot their feature version of the movie they wanted to make. They've got budget, they've got crew, and now they've got credibility of an actual Hollywood actor of gangster character notoriety starring in their movie. They shoot, they wrap, they cut this movie, and their production studio sets up its first ever test screening. Now our filmmaker, he's super happy at this point. He's managed to come up with a movie under his own steam, get the funding, get this thing made, and give it credibility by having a super awesome actor in it. He's just waiting to show it to the world because he knows that once the world sees it, they're going to think he's as great as he thinks he is right now too. Only that's not quite how it goes down. The screening begins and it's not too long before people start to get up out of their seats and exit the theatre in groups with their coats. Now our filmmaker and his production buddies are sitting in the back row and they're wondering what the hell is happening. Do people usually go to the bathroom in groups with their coats? So this is pretty much a disaster and every filmmaker's worst nightmare, and it doesn't get any better with the reading of the scorecards. One-worded reviews such as sucked or garbage and complete waste of my time keep coming up. And as more and more of these pass through the hands of our filmmaker, he's starting to wonder what other career choices he might have available to him, as it's quite clear that filmmaking isn't really going to work out. And just to solidify his fear of the film being complete any further, this feature version gets rejected by Sundance. It only manages to stumble to a limited theatrical release, and it doesn't get anywhere near making its money back. Our filmmaker's first feature film is certified a flop. Heartbroken by this, our filmmaker leaves the film industry forever to become an accountant, and then a dentist, and finally an estate agent. Actually, none of those things are true at all. And if you think about how this filmmaker has dealt with other obstacles arriving to this point in his very short career so far, he's managed to reframe things and always make a success out of them. And that's a big part of filmmaking, because of one fantastic lightbulb moment that occurred right there in that room when he was reading through those audience scorecards. As these terrible reviews are passing through his hands, one reaches him that's a little more detailed than the rest. This particular review card is filled with copious notes, and it was made by one woman who stayed and watched the entirety of his movie. Now, she'd written character quotes, she'd talked about things that she'd loved, jokes she found funny. It turns out that this movie was her kind of film, and that's the thing that our filmmaker managed to grasp. And with this card in his hand, he stands up and he tells all of his producers, this woman is our audience. And he's right, of course. Every filmmaker has a specific audience. We're not trying to make everybody happy. We're merely trying to put out a view of the world that we find interesting in the hope that other people will find it interesting too. Now, sometimes finding that audience can be easier than other times. And for this particular filmmaker, slowly but surely, more and more people that he would consider his type of audience found his film. This eventually included one New York Times film critic who loved the movie and gave it the sort of review that meant that eventually it did make its money back. Now, the ups and downs and the entire journey that our filmmaker and his friends went on to get this movie to the point it was now at gave him the confidence and the know-how to make his second movie 2 years later. That film was entitled Rushmore, and it starred Bill Murray, and it set our filmmaker on a path to becoming one of the most interesting and unique filmmakers of the 21st century. This was, if you haven't guessed it already, the story of Wes Anderson and his first movie, Bottle Rocket, who, as a young, fresh out of film school filmmaker, didn't let such obstacles as lack of funds, lack of cast and crew, lack of credibility, or even stone cold, harsh, one-worded reviews of his first film stop him from going on and crafting the kind of career he wanted out of the film industry. And that's something we can all learn from. Sometimes making your first movie is just about finding out what works, who your audience is, and how in the long run you can continue to make movies for that audience time and time again, because that's why we're all here. Not just to make one movie, but to make as many movies as we possibly can in the time we have. By the end of the 90s, Bottle Rocket was also put on a list of the top 10 best films of the decade. And the person who put that list together was Goodfellas' very own Martin Scorsese. Oh, and that filmmaking friend, the one who ended up playing the lead role in Bottle Rocket, That was Owen Wilson, who's ended up going on to having the kind of acting career one might define as wow. If you're interested in more stories of filmmakers overcoming the odds, then I suggest you click on this video here, because it's going to tell you the story of how Ridley Scott made Alien one of the scariest movies ever with a pair of rubber gloves and an uncut brownie. I'll see you there. Thanks for watching, filmmaker.